Okay, let's hit the button. Go live there. All right. It is a fine Tuesday, and welcome to Roots, Heart, and oh, you're muted, Stephan. Let's try it again. Let's do it one more time. It's a live Tuesday, and let's welcome to Roots, Heart, and
And so,
all right, there we go.
welcome, Mr. Adrian Miller.
Yeah.
What's up, y'all?
Hey, what's happening, Adrian? Good to see you.
Good to be with you.
Uh, Roots, Heart, and Soul, of course, is based off my book, Roots, Heart, and Soul, with Amy Condon. And it's such a pleasure to have Adrian Miller here because he did the forward for Roots, Heart, Soul, which is a great honor to have a James Beard Award winner, write a forward for you. I'm in some high cotton, when you got somebody like Adrian writing the forward for you and things like that.
You got a lot of pull, young man.
Oh man,
You got a lot of pull, young man.
Just doing what I can. Just doing what I can with what I got. That's all.
Right. I'm liked but highly favored. As they say.
You are definitely highly favored.
Yeah,
Mr. Adrian Miller, such a pleasure and a delight to have you with us on our stage. Wow. When I was writing the post for this show, I had goosebumps. Unbelievable. I had the pleasure of reading your book. So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome Adrian Miller to the stage. Denver-based, James Beard Award winner, food writer, recovering attorney. I gotta have some questions about that one. And certified barbecue judge. Adrian has been featured in the Netflix hit documentary High on the Hog, How African American Cuisine Transformed America. Miller's first book, Soul Food, The Surprising Story of an American Cuisine, One Plate at a Time, won the James Beard Foundation Award for Scholarship and Reference in 2014. His second book, The President's Kitchen Cabinet, which I had the pleasure of reading, the story of the African American who have fed our first families from Washington to the Obamas, was published on President's Day 2017. He was the finalist for the 2018 NAACP Image Award for Outstanding Literary Work Nonfiction and 2018 Colorado Book Award for History. Adrian's third book, Black Smoke, African Americans and the United States of Barbecue, won the 2022 James Beard Award for Reference, History, and Scholarship, and is now also nominated for Colorado Book Award for History. Wow.
Congratulations, my friend.
Yes.
That is such a crazy bio to read. A recovering attorney. We're captivated by this YSL trial down here in Atlanta. So every time we get to see an attorney, like to see what's going on with this mess down here. But anyway, Roots Heart Soul podcast on HRN Heritage Radio Network. Stephan, go ahead, kick off because you've been itching to talk to Adrian. I know him very well, but go ahead, kick off some questions for Adrian.
Absolutely. So, since Adrian is an historian, my first burning question is about barbecue.
Mm-hmm.
Now, barbecue is as American as it's supposed to be. However, the name barbecue comes from the word barbacoa, which is originated from the Taínos, where the Taínos were the first inhabitants of the Caribbeans, especially the island of Haiti. And then we have the Maroons, which came from Africa, who also started perfecting the technique of barbacoa. So, Adrian, in these conversations, how come that little bit of history is never mentioned?
Well, I think Well, first of all, it's great to be with you all. So I'm looking forward to the conversation. I think the main thing is because we've had a European telling of the story, which erases a lot of these contributions. So, the earliest depiction we get is of Columbus's second voyage to the Caribbean, where he goes to what we now call the Dominican Republic. And like you said, this word barbacoa is what the Spanish sailors approximated for the word the indigenous people were using for that raised platform of sticks on which the meat and vegetables and iguanas was being cooked over a slow fire. So it really didn't apply to the cooking process or the finished product. It was really just that platform. And so the story that gets told is, well, Europeans see this, and then they go to the American South, and they create this type of cooking and introduce European animals, and that's how we get barbecue. But that completely erases indigenous people already in the American South cooking a certain way, and then later the arrival of enslaved Africans who got into the mix. So I just think it's that old story of, he who has the power gets to tell the stories. And I think that's why that's how that shaped barbecue, and is really not giving us a complete picture of its history.
My question, follow up to that is that, when you have that European influence, and you see Texas, where, Texas is salt and pepper on brisket, and that's all it is. And maybe, more salt and more pepper. But then you get to, the other side of the states, where you'll see more spices inside of it and things like that. So do you think there is a juxtapose between the European influence and the way barbecue is seasoned compared to others, or is it by availability, is it by custom, or is it by economic fortune that we kind of see those transitions happen?
I think it's all of the above, really, because it's interesting how barbecue just plays out in different ways in different places and over time. So sometimes it's about the cut of the meat. Before, for 200 years plus, barbecue was about whole animal cooking. And it really isn't until the 20th century that we start to get this emphasis on smaller cuts of meat, when barbecue moves from a rural context to an urban context. And a lot of times those cuts of meat were European carryovers, right? Pork shoulders. German immigrants were used to pork shoulders in Germany. And so when they get over here, instead of cooking that whole animal, which requires a level of skill, right? Because you've got different cuts of meat cooking at different rates of time and textures and all that. It's a different skill set. And then, of course, the famous brisket right now. This is from those Central European immigrants who show up in Central Texas. They were butchers. They were used to selling meat. So they had meat markets. And then they just started smoking the leftover cuts and selling it to local ranch hands and oil workers and things like that. And so really what they're doing is not technically barbecue, because barbecue as it developed was cooking over a direct heat source for a long period of time and managing that fire and other things. But look, I value my life, so I'm not going to roll up in Texas and say, y'all aren't technically barbecuing. I'm not going to do that. So I really think it's all the above, man. Class, race, place. But one thing we do know, this is my argument, not everybody agrees, but I believe it's Native American, its foundation. And then later you get Europeans and Africans in the mix, and it plays out differently in different locales. But we do know that by the time you get to the early 1800s, blackness and barbecue are wedded, because early barbecue was very labor intensive, and enslaved Africans and later enslaved African Americans were the ones forced to do that work. They had to clear the area for the barbecue, dig the pit, chop the wood, kill the animals, butcher them, process them, put poles in them, flip them regularly over that heat source where, they put the chopped wood in the pit, set it aflame to get hardwood burning coals. Then they had to moisten the meat with the sauce. Then they were cooking the side dishes. Then they had to clean up everything and then serve the food and then provide the after barbecue entertainment. So from A to Z, it was a black labor endeavor for a very, very long time. And it's really only recently that white dudes started to get heavily associated with barbecue. At least the production of it, the making.
The production of it. Yeah. And maybe some awards in there too. I would say that you see that influence, from the award seasons and things like that. Not switching directly from barbecue, but just talking about the evolution of this food in the country. One thing that Stephan and I talk about a lot is understanding the diversity of the diaspora in food, and where in certain parts of the country, yams are we call them yams or we call them sweet potatoes. We call macaroni and cheese, but sometimes we're getting lobster macaroni and cheese and other forms of things like that. And so the question I always pose, I like to pose to people is, what is the state of Black and brown cooking in the Americas
Currently? Yeah, so I think it's varied now, because you've got the traditional and now you've got these other kind of trends that have developed. So I like to say with Black and brown cooking right now, you've got the traditional forms, what we're kind of used to in terms of classic interpretations of the cuisine. And then you have these quote unquote elevated, and that's a problematic term because it denigrates, the traditional form, but you have these elevated types that focus on heirloom vegetables, heritage meat, expensive seasonings, things like that. I think the most exciting trend that's emerged recently is the vegan vegetarian. That's where I'm seeing the most creativity and energy right now. And then there's also, health conscious in addition to the vegan and vegetarian. And so that's where you could still have the meat, but you're trying to reduce the fat, the salt, the sugar, things like that. And then I see a lot of fusion happening, where different cuisines from around the world and global flavor profiles are being wedded to traditional African-American types of cuisine to create something new. One example is soul food egg rolls, right?
Correct.
This idea of taking a wonton, putting any kind of soul food ingredient or maybe even a whole bunch in it, deep fat frying, and then you've got a soul roll.
Right. I mean, we see it with collard green egg rolls. It's probably the most prevalent one that we've seen, a pulled pork one. I even seen a roti one while I was in St. Lucia. Most people know I'm back from St. Lucia from vacation. I made Stephan so jealous. I was in the Caribbean while he was in New York. Getting my third summer tan on. This year. But it's been great. But you see that a lot of those ingredients are coming across the board, and it's such a great way to have people celebrate our food. And sometimes you have to meet people where they are, and certainly an egg roll is one way to do so.
Yeah, and I think the exciting thing about right now is that I think the typical American diner is more open to global flavors, more so than they've ever been. So they're willing to they're willing to just experiment and taste what that different thing is. And I think that creates a tremendous opportunity for Black and brown chefs right now.
Oh, that's great. What you got, Stephan? You're on mute again, my friend. There you go. Are you there, Stephan? Okay, I see you.
Acting up.
That's all right. Yeah, your computer hasn't had enough room yet. That's all it is.
Here we go.
I brought out the good rum since Adrian was on too. Just by the way,
So here's a question for you, which you mentioned in your earlier response. The fact that our story again it seems to have been told or is still being told by not us, if you will. So we're not the ones really pushing the narrative. Still, there is a lot of room for us to do that. Why do you think it is so important that we grab our stories, our narrative by both hands, and really let us talk about what we're all about, what our food is all about, what our history is all about, because somehow history being told by someone else seems to be watered down or being deviated from the truth, if you will.
Yeah. Well, I think the main thing is we just have a fascinating story to tell. The whole range of human experiences in our story, and it comes out through our food. And I just didn't know that until I started looking closely at food. I mean, I liked soul food, but I didn't know where it was from. I just know it was something my caregivers made, and I enjoyed it. But then when you start to delve into history and you see how there are contributions from West Africa as well as Europe and from the indigenous, and how this all came together in this region and then how it changed and what it meant to the community in different places. It's just really powerful. And then the other thing is, look, if we don't tell our stories, we know that's the American story, is we know that somebody else is going to tell our story and profit from it, right? That's the American way, is to see what Black people are doing and then figure out a way to profit on that without us making the lion's share of that profit as the originators of that art form or whatever it is. And I'll just give you an example. Right now, I would safely venture that your typical American, when they think about a classic American dish like fried chicken, they don't think of a Black chef first. They're probably thinking about David Chang or Thomas Keller or all these other people, instead of the Black cooks who have been associated with making fried chicken an art form in this country. Now, why is that? Part of that is some of that culinary knowledge was lost, but over time, and Psyche Forson Wilson writes a lot about this, is that a shame has been put on our food so much that Black chefs have distanced themselves from our food, and that created a void for other people outside our culture to start making stuff like Nashville hot chicken, fried chicken are examples I'm thinking of right now. And so when that void is created, when that void exists, somebody's going to fill it, because there's a lot of money to be made. And then I'll just end with this. I've had the blessing to travel internationally to places where there aren't a lot of Black folks, and our food is showing up in these other places, but they're not connecting it to African Americans. They're being connected to white chefs or other people outside our culture.
I see it. One thing, when I opened Soul, it was Richard Southern Fried first, and now it's, Soul Food and Culture. And I opened it, because I was one of those people, along with, great chef, Dwayne Nutter and everything like that. When we worked at Oak Room, 12, 15, and 21 course tasting menu, when we first, did it, our influence was like Ferran Andrea and that group of people. And then we stopped actually doing that in the tasting menu, when we really started to go back to our own heritage. One line Dwayne always says is that they call it coq au vin, but my mom says it's a smothered chicken. Really the same thing. When you think about it from that standpoint, that you're absolutely right, that the coloring of the story, or the erasing of the color in the story, has always been paramount in our country. That's why I wrote my book. That's why I'm glad you did the forward, and things like that as well. And of course you have your books as well.
Yeah, that's why I'm excited that there's been a sea change in the storytelling. So we're seeing more and more Black chefs get book deals and being able to add their perspective, tell their story. Now, thanks to social media and technology, it's a lot easier to get your story out. So we've got people blogging, we've got people on social media. So I think it's an exciting time for storytelling. So I am seeing a change, especially in the barbecue space. There have been so many barbecue cookbooks by Black barbecue practitioners that it's been really heartening to see, because before, the late 2000s, 2010s, the last Black authored cookbook on barbecue that was put out by a major press was in the 1980s, and that was by Bobby Seale, the former Black Panther.
Wow, that is. I'm just shaking my head. That's almost, no, everyone, when you listen to the podcast, they're going to see me shaking my head. I got to announce it, shaking my head here. We're about, 18 minutes after the hour here. We're at Roots Heart Soul podcast on Heritage Radio Network. Chef Todd Richards here, of course, Chef Stephan. We're here with Adrian Miller, and it's just such a pleasure to have him here. Adrian did the forward to Roots Heart Soul cookbook. Stephan, what's your next question for our esteemed gentleman here, Adrian Miller? I think Stephan might be frozen just a little bit there. Give us 1 second. There you go, Stephan.
Oh. So a very burning question for me is, I saw a post of you that was talking about wanting to be the executive chef of the White House. So I know this was a joke, but at the same time, it really.
Wait! It was a joke? I thought it was serious.
Man, I have zero chance of getting that.
He wrote the book. Come on, go ahead, Stephan. I'm sorry. Go ahead. I thought he was serious.
So it got my mind working all kinds of ways, and I've wanted to ask that question. why would it be so important that this tradition continues?
Yeah, because if you were to take all of the White House chefs over time and put them in a room, most of them would be Black women. And I don't think people know that. They really don't know how much African Americans have shaped the presidential palette over the centuries. Now, part of that is tragedy, right? Because we had a lot of slaveholding presidents, and they would bring their enslaved cooks to the White House. But also, there was this notion for a long time that Black people were born cooks. So professionally, we didn't have a lot of opportunities. Our ancestors didn't have a lot of opportunities, but they were afforded plenty in the culinary space. And so by the time you get to the late 1800s, there's a rivalry internationally in the sense that white French cooks are held up as the standard for, culinary around the world. But the American response was, well, no, we've got these Black cooks here that throw down. Usually we're talking about Black women.
Right.
That was kind of the rivalry, right? So, we really haven't had an African American running the White House kitchen since Lyndon Johnson. He had a private chef named Zephyr Wright, who was a family cook. And while they were in between cooks, she ran the White House kitchen. The last one to be offered the job that I know of is Patrick Clark, a famous chef from New York. And he turned it down because it was too much of a pay cut compared to what he was making at the hotel.
And the Tavern on the Green, it was right after that too, right?
Yeah. So he's by the time they offered the job to him, he was at the Hay Adams across the street from the White House. Yeah.
I mean, just talking about Patrick Clark, man, that is, I didn't mean to cut you off, but when you said that, my whole being changed, to see somebody on TV that looked like us, talk like us and commanded that respect. But go ahead with finish what you were saying, Adrian.
Oh, no. So that all I would wanted to say was that there's a very rich legacy. And I think an African American being in that role would just remind folks of that legacy. And there's certainly African Americans in presidential food service, serving as assistant chefs, serving in the White House mess. Those are usually Navy chefs, and even on Air Force One, and when the president travels and things like that. So we have African Americans in presidential food service, but I think just having someone in that top position would be, it would just highlight the legacy.
Right. I mean, certainly, the legacy of the White House, both good and bad, has always been surrounded around food, though. I mean, the celebration on the gardens and things like that you speak about, and it really just tells, the rounding of the story. One question, we talking about, you saw me getting all gushy over here about Patrick Clark, and you speaking about him, is who are your culinary heroes? I mean, who are the people that you just like? Wow, I got to meet this person. Or I'm glad I got to write about this person, and just makes you smile when somebody talks about them or they walk into the room.
Yeah, so I don't know what it says about me that most of my heroes are either no longer alive or I've never met them. But I'll just tell you in my writing journeys, just some of the fascinating people were Edna Lewis. And I did try to meet her, but it was later in her life, and it was it just was hard to meet her. But the presidential chefs, just Hercules Posey, who was the enslaved chef for Washington, and James Hemings, who was the enslaved chef for Thomas Jefferson. Man, I would love to meet those brothers. And then Zephyr Wright, who I mentioned earlier, she seemed hilarious, and she had an effect on the presidency because Lyndon Johnson used her Jim Crow experiences to lobby for passage of the 1964 Civil Rights Act.
Wow.
So yeah, those are just amazing people that I wish I could have met culinarily, because I'm just thinking about their impact on history.
No, that's great. Some of those people, Edna Lewis, shout out to Edna Lewis Foundation, who's always, everyone's always supported and things like that. And she remains still, one of the most talked about chefs. I would add, in that kind of category, Joe Randall as well. Every time you talk, with Joe, it's amazing to speak to someone. And then for me, Daryl Evans, who influenced our entire tree of culinary between me, Dwayne, Dave. I mean, that whole tree of him. When you get ready to write a story, for Netflix or someplace like that, make sure you consider Chef Daryl Evans' story.
Yeah.
Stephan, what do you got for Adrian over here?
So let's talk a little bit about High on the Hog,
Mhm.
because this is a documentary which had me in tears. To be honest with you, the moment that I saw the steps where the first slaves left, and Benin specifically, because the majority of the slaves that came to Haiti are from that region,
Mhm.
are from Benin.
Mhm.
Um, and that had me completely in tears. But then when I saw the discovery of food, and I saw the what what I know for the cuisine of Haiti, and I saw that direct correlation, and I went gaga, to be
Yeah.
honest.
Yeah.
Right.
I went completely gaga. But then when I met, forgive me,
Stephen Satterfield.
no, actually, the
Oh,
professor.
Jessica B.
Yes.
Harris.
Okay.
So
Yes.
when I met Jessica for the first time, and she started speaking French to me, and started speaking, she knew about Haiti more than I did. It was
That's not
absolutely
surprising.
crazy. It
Yeah.
was absolutely crazy.
She probably even
Okay.
knew the doctor that spent you on your hiney too. 'Cause
Jessica
she is so
Jessica
phenomenal with her and her
Jessica knew
understanding
more
of
about
everything.
Haiti. Jessica knew more about Haiti. It's like, what am I? It was more like she was teaching me
Mhm.
at a certain point. And I had the very big pleasure of being invited by her to teach about Haitian cuisine for a program at the CIA, at the Culinary Institute of America.
Oh, nice.
Wow.
Tell me what it meant to you, both personally as an historian, but also as a culinarian, somebody who talks about food. What did it mean to you, not only to be part of this extraordinary um, uh, um, project, but also to work with somebody like Jessica? And
Yeah. So yeah, it was just really an honor to be part of such a cultural moment when High on the Hog came out, and it was such a validation because y'all know from the gatekeepers, they always tell us nobody's interested in this, nobody's going to watch that. That book's been written 20 years ago. There's no room in the market. While all these other cuisines get celebrated over and over and over. So to see that watershed moment when so many people responded to that I think that signaled to the gatekeepers, hey, maybe y'all should start telling more Black stories.
Mhm.
So that was cool. And I got to share about my work on presidential chefs and also talk about barbecue. It was a game changer. Really changed the trajectory of my own career in terms of requests that I now get to speak and write. So it was just a wonderful. It was wonderful to be part of positive storytelling about African American food traditions. And much like you, I'm fascinated by the connections to West Africa. I'm really interested in these culinary survivals or adaptations, right? Like, what did our ancestors, what were they used to, and then when they got here, how did they shift in order to sustain themselves under the most horrible conditions, but try to at least recreate a taste of home. And so I'm fascinated by all of that, not only in the United States, but just throughout the Americas, and how people interacted with their local environment and the new people they were living around. And then I go way back with Jessica B. Harris. I knew her through, and that's how I met Chef Todd as well, as something called the Southern Foodways Alliance, which is all about promoting and preserving the diverse food cultures of the American South. And so she was one of the key people that got that institution going. So got to hear a lot about her work, and I have several of her books on my shelf. I'm looking at them right now. So
Right.
yeah.
I mean, the great thing about understanding West Africa and seeing people tell the story in a different way. I remember watching Anthony Bourdain when he was with our good friend Pierre Tom, and they're out there, spearing sea urchin, and there was this grill on the sand on the beach, and they cut it open, put it on there, and people ask me all the time, like, why would you put sea urchin in the soul food cookbook? Like, do you know what we doing over here in Africa? Like, like y'all crazy. Like, first of all, Open World Food South, where we had a sushi bar, and now I see Black people eating sushi, eating sea urchin, and I mean, really out there with a spear, in the water, stabbing it, and all the kids come around, they're eating it just straight out of the shell. I was like, come on, y'all. I think that once, a lot of times our story is told, we get limited to certain things,
Right.
and I think that's where the frustration, comes in, sometimes is that limitation, and sometimes it's self-imposed, that limitation.
Yep. If you didn't say that, I was going to say we got to be real and understand that a lot of times Black people, we're limiting our own imagination about what we eat and the culinary heritage we have. And part of that is just that people just don't know because no one has taken the time to chronicle these things in a way and then disseminate them broadly. And the other thing I would say is we need more cheerleaders for our culinary traditions in our culture. Like, a lot of our tastemakers, they don't really talk about our food that much. You may have a few Dirty South rappers, but other than that, the people that are on a global level, how much do they talk about our food? I mean, if you think,
Well, now that we talk about, which really, on the next 30 minutes here, we'll bring this up. We're at the 30-minute mark, Roots, Heart, Soul podcast. Todd Richards, Stephan with Adrian Miller on Heritage Radio Network. We have to give a shout out to Heritage Radio Network because we have a great fundraiser coming up, a Feast for the Senses. It's going to be September 29th at Artmore Music Hall in Philadelphia. And it's a really great fundraiser for Heritage Radio Network. We're proud to be part of Heritage Radio Network and really to have this in Philadelphia, which is outside of New York. A lot of times we do things for Heritage Radio Network inside NYC, but to expand to Philadelphia, and I'm in Atlanta, so we're going to get HRN down here to ATL soon. But it's really a great cause. It keeps everyone's podcast going, and we really want to make sure that everyone goes there if you're in the Philadelphia area. One thing, Adrian, to keep continuing the conversation about the gatekeepers and things like that, and understanding the food ways and things that are important to us is the economics. We talk about this conversation a lot on this podcast, and understanding that that collard greens take 2 days to be delicious, and we can only charge $6-7 for them. Oxtails, which Stephan and myself are responsible for $40 a plate oxtails, right now. But how does the economics of food, and understanding how we need to relate back to the gatekeepers, to invest into the community and open restaurants. How do we reach them and to tell that story and make sure that economics is part of it?
Yeah, it's a tough time right now because food prices have risen considerably. I think it's because of corporate greed for the most part, but it's a reality facing consumers. And so, Black entrepreneurs have a real pressure on price because our food is devalued. Everybody expects it to be cheap, and they ignore the artistry, and they just ignore everything that goes into getting that plate in front of you. So I think there has to be an education process for the consumers to start telling people this is the real cost of your food, and this is why we have these prices. But appreciate the work that goes into it. And I think about one thing that Chef Ricky Moore told me one time. We have to reframe the conversation. Instead of asking, why is this food so expensive? Start asking, why is that food so cheap?
Absolutely.
That stuff that you're eating, why is that so cheap? And is that stuff really good for you? So I think there's a lot of reframing that has to happen. But the main thing that happens for restaurateurs, anybody who's in the food space, is we need to have people support us. Because the gatekeepers, they make an argument, right? They keep saying nobody is going to buy this or economically support it. Now, look, if we don't show up when products are available, then the gatekeepers are going to go, see, we told you. Because the gatekeepers, in their defense, they are running businesses, right? And so a lot of times the economic case has to be shown to them. And that's only going to happen when people who support what we do, who want to have these stories out there and want to have our food have a higher profile, they have to start supporting us when we get these opportunities.
Stephan, what's your question for Adrian Miller?
So true. So definitely true. When we were looking at a piece of oxtail as a thrown away food, and now oxtail is costing me, $12, $14 a pound, and and then you're still whining about the price that I put on my menu.
Right.
You
Right.
know.
Yeah. But part of that I think is because consumers just really don't know, right? We don't take the time to tell them this is why this costs this much to put on your plate, and I'm making something delicious that you love.
I mean, but something that's delicious that you love that takes skill though too. I mean, to cook it properly, to not have only the seasoning on the outside, but have the seasoning on the inside. To extract the gelatin and the collagen out of there, so that your hands are sticky when you pick it. And anybody who's eating oxtails with a knife and fork, please. I mean, come on. I mean, like. If you can't pick up an oxtail, right, and eat it, and your fingers are not sticky, I understand. I get it. Anyone wants to talk about fine dining with, I am the king of that. Anything I touch is going to be expensive. I would tell you that right away. But there's nothing wrong still with just picking up an oxtail and get that
Oh no,
stickiness on your
there,
on your hand, right?
there is only one way to really enjoy a piece of oxtail.
Okay, thank you, thank
Is to take it with two fingers and just suck in
you.
every part of the bone.
That's what
Right.
I was going to ask about.
If you're not doing that, you're
Right.
not eating oxtail.
All right, that's what I was going to ask about. That was what I was waiting for. Thank you for that
Yeah.
payoff.
Yeah. I mean, you gotta have it though. I mean, like everything should be, in that one. And you get around the plate. There's so many things around the plate too that are so important. Like those grains of rice, sticking in that and cooking rice perfectly is important to a dish like oxtails. Because if it's too mushy, it just folds in. Having those grains break up the oxtail, in your mouth is so important.
And one thing this conversation is highlighting is the fact that these food preparations, traditions have been around a long time in the Black space, right? But then they get discovered by fine dining chefs outside our community, and they get presented to people as a new thing, and that chef charges a lot of money, and then all of a sudden popularity soars and the price soars. So,
Well,
Absolutely.
with the price soaring though, it is one tail, per cow, and the thing is that I understand it from an economic standpoint that hey, it would cost that much, you know, if you looked at it from the basis of just one piece per animal. However, in our community, it was never given that kind of credence. We made it that way. We've made it that delicious, and that's just a testament of the people who cooks it.
So it's really fitting that we're having the chance to talk to you. Um, I want to talk a little bit about your book, your very first book, Soul Food, because it sort of massages its way into this conversation because Todd's first book is called Soul. Um, his second book, Roots, Heart, and Soul, also talks about soul. So, what is the definition of that word? If I can ask that question,
yeah, well,
on a food standpoint, and also on a cultural standpoint.
yeah. So let me address the cultural first. So it's a malleable term, but it really comes from the music world. So because a popular definition is that soul arose in the 1960s with these strong expressions of Black identity, Black power, Black is beautiful. But it was really in the late 1940s and early 1950s, Black jazz musicians were miffed because they felt like white jazz musicians were the ones getting the best gigs, the most fame for this musical genre they felt they created. So they decided to take the music to a place where they thought white musicians could not mimic the sound. And that was the sound of the Black church in the rural South. So in the late 40s and early 50s, this gospel influenced jazz sound emerges, and the Black artists started describing that as soul and funky. So it was really soul music first, and then it was soul brothers, soul sisters, soul food. So soul as a concept, this idea of Black identity and expression was floating around in the Black community through a lot of the 50s. It just got popular in the 1960s. So that's the cultural part. In terms of the culinary, I have a very specific definition. I believe that soul food is the food that Black people took out of the South during the Great Migration and transplanted in other parts of the country, because soul food is a limited menu compared to Southern food. because of seasonality, availability. Not there's a whole bunch, like in the South, there's like 15 types of field peas you can eat, 10 types of greens. But because of the emerging food system at the time of the Great Migration, people could only get limited things outside the South. So that's why when people think of soul food in generally, they're only thinking about 5 types of greens, right? Collard, kale, mustard, turnip, cabbage. They're only thinking about one type of field pea, black-eyed peas, rather than purple hull, crowder, lady peas, red island, sea island peas that are red, So I argue that soul food is a really limited menu. Part of the Southern food family, related to Gullah Geechee, related to Creole, related to what was going on in Chesapeake Bay, but it's its own different thing that really is a cuisine of movement. I actually think people should think of soul food as a migrant cuisine, because this is the last thing I'll say. If you look at immigrant food in this country, what Americans tend to think of a culture's food is usually the celebration food of that culture, because a restaurateur wants to show you the very best. There'll be some day in and day out stuff, but usually it's the celebration food. That's what soul food in the popular imagination is. Barbecue, fried chicken, the glorious cakes, and all that. That was special occasion food.
Absolutely.
That was not stuff that people ate on the regular.
Absolutely. I mean, fried chicken for us was, once a week or even once a month. And honestly, in our household, I had to go next door to Mrs. Arnold's, from Arkansas to eat fried chicken, because we didn't, do it that way. My family was broiled chicken, and that, or another term for barbecue, and the broiling and the seasoning at that, and then having that marriage of my mom's family out of Alabama through to Ohio's, my dad's family out of Mississippi's, having two pots of rice on the stove, because my mom put butter in her rice, and my dad would not do it out of New Orleans to Louisiana. It's like, butter does not belong in rice, So, so when you have that migration, what is that dividing line? We're still trying to figure out, still, and it's still soul food, but I think it's limiting. I think the term is limiting to the overall understanding of our culture. I believe that we try to expand it when we look at mac and cheese as a part of soul food, and we've added, lobster to it. We've added collard greens to it. We've rolled it into croquettes and fried it. We're trying to expand that heritage, but I think we're missing a bit of history, so we wouldn't have to take something so general and make it expansive.
Wait, could you walk me through that final point? I guess I was up with you until that very last point.
Well, what I'm saying is that something in general is mac and cheese. We're taking that one ingredient, now we're trying to make it to lobster and mac and cheese and things like that. But what I'm saying is that if we really want to make something expansive, you would go from black-eyed peas and you would go find sea island red peas. You would go find the other things and not just focus on just one starch, one dairy, one cheese. There's, to your point about the peas and the greens, and even in my sister puts turnips and collards together. I mean, for me, that's blasphemous. Collards, are collards. Turnips are turnips. They cook differently, and things like that. So that's what makes this conversation so great and so fun. That we could discover, our own, hidden gems in our family that we fight over at the kitchen table. Stephan?
So, one of my fondest memories growing up as a kid was Sunday dinner at my grandmother's. This is where, the whole family gathered. It was a big table. My grandmother would spend the whole day preparing all kinds of dishes. One of my favorite dishes was cow tongue. That most people can't even say the word without feeling some kind of way. But she would make this cow tongue and put it on the dinner table, and I would jump on it. And for me, when I think about soul, I think about where does it take me? Where does it take me? It takes me home. So when I taste a dish, wherever it might be, and suddenly it takes me to the memory of a Sunday dinner at my house, at my grandmother's house. For me, that's my definition of soul.
Yeah, I could definitely see that, because like I said, it's malleable, right? It's a term that you can pour a lot into it to give it meaning, and I think that's part of its beauty. And people outside our culture see that beauty because they're calling their peasant food or home cooking, they're calling it soul. I mean, I got a bookshelf right on my shelf called Japanese Soul Cooking, and it's talking about home cooking in Japan. So, I think we need to be careful as African Americans that if we came up with this term, and I think we need to be a little bit more of cultural guardians for this term, and just like let people know, well, yeah, you can call whatever that, but this is what soul food is.
It is what it is, right?
Yeah.
James Brown said it's on the one. I mean, he's the one that really started that. We're getting close to the end of Roots Heart Soul podcast. This episode, Chef Todd Richards here with Chef Stephan, of course, and Adrian Miller on Heritage Radio Network. There's just a couple more questions, Adrian. We really appreciate your time here that we want to ask you. And one question, because you have so much knowledge of food and the diaspora and those things like that. But when you sit down and you want to impress someone, what is at that dinner table? What is that food that you go to? If you had to roll up your sleeves, maybe even at the White House, what dishes would you have on the table?
All right. Well, one of them is gonna make you mad, so just get ready. Okay, I'm a big seafood fan. Okay. And I love bone-in catfish, man.
That's not gonna make me mad. That's gonna
no, but this next one will.
Okay, all right.
But my absolute favorite thing to make is mustard and turnip greens with smoked turkey.
So mustard and turnips does not upset me at all. That makes sense from a leaf size, a stem size. Those things cook together very, very well. So mustard and turnips, okay. Bone-in catfish. It's something about bone-in catfish because again, like the oxtails, and I'm so fixated that when you pull that meat out, you got to pick it up by your hands first of all. And you pull that meat off the bone, you get that gelatinous, Oh my goodness! After this, I'm gonna have to go cook dinner. But go ahead.
Yeah. And this shows you how hardcore I am. I actually like the wild catfish that has that slightly muddy taste. Yes, I actually like that.
So. Oh my goodness! This might be a whole nother episode. We have to bring you back on that because we could spend a whole hour on talking about things that are traditionally
do not start talking about catfish and spaghetti now.
I'm all about it.
I will go into depth, but think about things that that we grew up on that taste differently now because they've been farm raised. Catfish to me is one of those. Yeah. I mean, one of those things that if it's not out of Mississippi, to me, it's not even catfish.
The texture and taste of Mississippi and Louisiana catfish too.
Louisiana, right?
It's good stuff. And then look, I'm gonna name something that I would make because I'm just not a good baker, but my mom made, and that's lemon icebox pie.
Oh, wow.
If you've never heard of this, it's like if you've ever had key lime pie, just imagine a lemon custard topped with meringue, but then you have crushed vanilla wafers glued together with butter for the crust. Man.
Okay, I can taste it in my mouth.
You want to talk about some good eating.
Wow, lemon icebox pie. Wow, okay. I got. Rarely we even get to desserts on these conversations, but now, Now we're going to have a whole discussion on catfish and icebox pie. My next door neighbor, hers was that chocolate mousse pie and with graham cracker crust. I mean, that thing was.
Was it really light? Was it really light?
It was so airy. Like you take the spoon, it's just like custard, and it was so light and just fluffy and that crunch. People, shame kids for being fat, but shame me because I was next door eating like the richest kid in the neighborhood. So, Stephan, I know you eat some desserts too.
I'm being reminded. I'm being reminded of my auntie's desserts that was made with fingers and coffee and
man.
Geez, and this lemon cream custard. It's taking me back, man. It's really taking me back.
Nice.
There is just something about those foods that just sticks with you.
Yeah.
Those dishes that just sticks with you, like my grandmother's tuna rice casserole.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, I think either we're all great cooks here, or we're just all insatiably hungry right now, talking talking about food. But this is where these discussions really need to take place, though, because now we're giving credence. Why are we having this? This serious discussion is because we, honor the foods of the people that prepared them for us, and also give them a pathway, moving
So
forward.
so Adrian, we're getting to our 10-minute mark. Before we close this wonderful conversation, and we need to bring you back again to take it much further than this. What's next for you? Where are you? How do we find you? How does the public find you? Just give us a little bit of an insight.
Yeah. So my tagline is the soul food scholar, and dropping knowledge like hot biscuits, which I hope that I've done a little bit during our
Oh,
conversation
absolutely,
today.
Actually, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So if you do Soul Food Scholar, you're gonna find me on almost every platform. So I got a Facebook fan page, Soul Food Scholar on Instagram, on X, and yeah. So and my website is soulfoodscholar.com. What's next for me? I just inked a deal to write a book on the history of Asian American presidential chefs.
Oh,
I'm
wow.
going to co-author that book because other than African Americans, Asian Americans have had the strongest representation in the presidential kitchen, and nobody's told their story. So I'm excited about that. And then I'm shopping a book on Black street food vendors in the U.S., which is a tradition that goes back to the 1600s, and it's the coming together of food, commerce, and music. And man, I just got some amazing stories to tell. And here's the really cool thing. Between 1880 to 1920, people would listen to Black folks either singing or rhyming to get customers' attention. And they put a lot of these songs down to sheet music. They call them street cries. And I've got 100 of those
Wow.
from
Oh, wow.
various cities. So I'm hoping to get a book deal where I can put out a compilation of those street cries, narrate them, have somebody else sing them because you don't want to hear me sing. And then,
Right.
you would know what it was like to walk around New Orleans in 1900 hearing people trying to get you to buy their stuff.
I mean, I just think about, man, that's so fascinating. I mean, not only the singing, that and probably in that gospel form, as well as the horn, the sound, coming in the drum. I could just imagine just hearing that voice of our people, ringing through. We're at Roots Heart Soul podcast. Chef Todd Richards, Chef Stephan on Heritage Radio Network. Well, we're going to say our fond farewell to our good friend Adrian Miller, who,
Absolutely.
you know who has graced us with his presence. And as a small note, coming up this next weekend is the Creole Food Fest located here in Atlanta. So we hope to see everyone there for Creole Food Fest. We go to
Absolutely.
Instagram.
August 24th and 25th. Please go check out our Instagram page, Creole Food Festival, for all the information that you need. I hope that everybody in Atlanta comes and drop by and taste the amazing food of so many Black and brown talented chefs. It's going to be an incredible event. Um, and of course, it, we want to thank you for continuing to support us. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, Roots Heart and Soul Podcast. Follow us on Instagram at Chef Todd Richards, at Chef Stephan.it, AYTI, and also follow us on Instagram at Roots Heart and Soul Podcast. We thank you again, Mr. Adrian Miller, for gracing us with your unbelievable presence and really sharing so much knowledge about food with us. We hope to have you once again. It'll be our pleasure. Everybody, we say
All right.
good night.
Yeah.
And
Good night, everyone.
to our next time.
Yep.
Next time. See y'all soon. Thanks.